Hi.
Hi everyone, we are now live. Welcome to our live Google Hangout following the screening of Matt Shepard is a Friend of Mine at American University. How did you all like it? My name is Caitlin Stone and I'm an outreach coordinator at Reactive Film. So I work with the College Action Network, who has worked really hard to put on a nationwide screening across many different schools, over a couple of dozen, and everyone is showing Matt Shepard is a Friend of Mine tomorrow on American University. Got a head start on us tonight, and we are really excited to have the director Michele with us here for a Google Hangout. Michele, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then we can get right into questions.
Sure. I'm going to be a nerd and have these headphones on so I can hear all you guys very clearly. But first of all, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being where you are and learning about Matt's story. This has been a really long personal journey for me and all of his friends and his family, just to share with the world a bit more about who Matt was as a human being, as opposed to just a victim, someone whose identity was tied to this horrific act of violence. So we're just very grateful to finally be out there and share a little bit about the Matthew Shepard behind the headlines.
Great. AU, chapter leaders, we have some questions ready?
Yes, we are going to be taking it to the audience. I guess. Whoops. Do you know? Sorry about that, Mike. Whoops.
Can you hear me now? It's wonderful. I guess I'll start. Hi. Hi, my name is Michele. I guess I was just curious if you could speak to, you talk about wanting to show your side of Matt and your Matt and the true Matt in the film. Do you think that the media covers the story and how the press just really went crazy with that and gave like an inaccurate depiction of who Matt was, or did you just feel it was another side of him that needed to be shared?
I heard most of what you said, but I think your question was about how the media was portraying Matt as opposed to the Matt I knew. Is that correct? There's echo. I did feel that it was really kind of heartbreaking to see how his story was unfolding in the media, and that he was just reduced to sort of a catchphrase or a very egregious act of violence, but just not much of a look behind like his humanity at all and who he was. And that was, as a personal friend, that was sad to see, because he was so much more than might go away. Sorry.
Let's pause real quick. Can you mute?
It is, yep.
It's muted?
I think so, yep.
Well, we can hear like the feedback from the room.
Alright, let's see. Is that better?
Let's try. Not quite.
Mute the mic on Google.
Yeah. Okay. Alright, I'll just do that. Okay. Sorry about that.
I'm scared to talk.
I think it's good.
Okay. Okay, should I try tackling it again?
Yeah, go for it. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, I guess just to sum up again, it's kind of hard to really reconcile someone who became such an enormous media figure, who's the face of a movement, who's the face of a very egregious act of violence that kind of defined a lot of our, American history. So in that, I just felt that it was really, really tragic that the world wasn't able to see any of the humanity behind all this media firestorm, and that they couldn't see that behind this horrific act of violence, this victim, there was a wonderful person who was like all of us in one way or the other. He was a young person trying to figure out his place in the world. He wanted to find love and be loved like we all do. And I thought that was a more important message to share at this time. You know, we are almost 17 years after his death, and I do think that there is a responsibility that we all have to share with the world his story in this way and reteach it in this more humanistic, emotional way, if that makes any sense. I just thought that there was a new way for his story to be told, and we are the only people who could do it.
Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask? Sure. If you could just stand up and kind of yell.
All right.
Maybe
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I understand that it seemed like one of the motivations for making the movie was the fact that despite the huge movement that Matt helped create, there were still so many hate crimes up to this day that are happening. And there still seems to not be enough done to try and prevent these crimes. And the passage we saw with Obama was a great moment, but was there a moment for you when you decided, based on perhaps something that happened, we really need to revisit this story with Matt, we need to tell it in a new way that is going to change people's minds, because it hasn't been enough yet?
That's a really, really great, insightful question. There's not a very simple answer, honestly. It's just there was so many stories that I kept seeing over the time, and my news feed is just riddled with terrible, tragic stories of not only hate crime victims, but kids taking their lives, being bullied, things like of that nature. And it's just, I take that personally, you know. I don't want Matt's death to be in vain. So when I hear stories of Leila Alcorn, or back then when I was cutting the film, it was Tyler Clementi who committed suicide, and he was at Rutgers University. That was deeply unsettling, because there's no reason why people should be made to feel less than just because they're perceived as different. And the thing is, I'm not a super, this is maybe sounds quite naive, I'm not like a super, I didn't want to create a super political movie. That didn't really interest me. I really was interested in kind of changing hearts and minds from that emotional level, and trying to access people's empathy and experience Matt and his story as a human being, as someone that they could relate to. And I felt that if people could relate to Matt in this way, that maybe they could reflect on their own lives and see how the impact that they can play in the lives of others, and just kind of change hate and bigotry in that small way.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay? Hi. Okay, could you speak a little bit about your process of making the film, some memorable moments, interviews that stood out to you personally?
Sure. No one ever asked me that. It's still ongoing, to be quite honest with you. It's my whole life right now. I didn't think it would take this long, but we're just very passionate about this film and what happens to it, and we're so personally attached that we just wanted to have the best care possible. So I've always wanted to make this film. Let's just go back. Almost immediately after it happened, but perhaps I just didn't have enough courage and perspective to do it right away, and I think ultimately that was probably for the best. So it was only in recent years that I was able to even talk about Matt without, being a blubbering mess. So back in 2009, I got permission from Judy Shepard, or her blessing really, to tell Matt's story in this way, and then I went on 2 really in-depth film shoots where we just retraced Matt's steps, wherever that was, Wyoming, Morocco, Switzerland, various states in the U.S., just kind of recapturing his journey. And then we stopped and did a Kickstarter campaign, 2 Kickstarter campaigns that were really successful, and probably my proudest moments of the film, because we really were connecting with like-minded, passionate people really cared about his story and the stories of other people like Matt Shepard, and needed this story to be told. So, you know, whenever we come across certain obstacles or personal challenges, I kind of remember them and all the champions that have kind of helped propel us along the way, such as React to Film. React to Film has been a great partner of ours as well. And also going back, I cut the film. It took me about a year, and that was really painful. At one point, the film was like 5 hours long, and I thought it was awesome, but no one wants to sit through 5 hours. And then we did the festival route. We've been sharing the film publicly for over a year and a half. And that's kind of where we're at today. We have a very limited theatrical release, so it's in a few theaters across North America. But we will be available digitally, which is exciting, at the end of the year, and then we'll be on Logo TV in June. And that's just very exciting to kind of reach a wider and even wider audience than we ever imagined.
Hi there. Throughout the film, there was a lot of scenes dedicated to thinking about his family and especially his brother, but his brother doesn't appear in the film. Can you talk a little bit about maybe just generally, if you can, making this film and trying to make it in the best interest of the family, and maybe talk a little bit about if his brother didn't want to appear in the film or why that was, if you can.
Yeah. That's such a great insightful question. They have smart kids at AU, huh? But it was probably an enormous. Maybe I made it more enormous than it should have been, because the Shepards are probably the best, awesomest people I could ever know. But I just felt sort of this tremendous obligation to tell their story with honesty and sensitivity. Sensitivity being, you know, probably a major thing. Like I didn't want to make anything that they would hate. But at the same time, I wanted, as they do, to be truthful to who Matt was and not present him as this martyr without flaws. And I was very lucky, because that's what the Shepards wanted as well. The Shepards were completely creatively hands-off of the entire project. Funny enough. And every time I had a cut of the film that was watchable, I would send it to Judy Shepard, and she just wouldn't ever watch it. And she only watched it after we had our international premiere in Amsterdam. And that was really crazy, because I sat next to them in the theater and was very hyper vigilant about all their reactions and stuff. But they were just very scared to see it, and I totally understand why. But at this point, they've seen the film a bunch of times and traveled around the world with me to share it, and they're very proud of it, and I'm grateful for that. But with Logan's a little bit different. You know, Logan and Matt were very, very, very close. I think we portray that in the film. He really loved his brother. They had such a close relationship, and this is something that is still so very painful for him, of course. And we asked him if he wanted to participate in this film a few times, and I think he probably thought about it a while, but ultimately it just wasn't something he could do. He will never publicly talk about Matt, and that's, you know, that's totally his prerogative, and we're friends of his, so we totally respect that. He is involved with the foundation. He works for the foundation full time, but he just will never kind of be sort of the upfront public person. His pain from losing Matt is something that will remain private.
Hi.
Hi.
So I've kind of got like a two-part question. The first one, you've kind of touched on a little bit, but like, how was it kind of balancing your role as a friend and as the filmmaker in this process, and how you kind of negotiated that situation, like a very unique situation, and then also how did your what did you learn about Matt that as this process went on that you didn't know about your friend in high school and how that changed throughout filming and interviewing different people who knew him later in his life.
The friend and filmmaker situation, balancing act, is one I probably did not do a very good job at. It's hard because, well, let's start from the beginning. I just was always very, very uncomfortable to be in the film. Just being vulnerable in that way. I didn't ever want anyone in the public or whoever viewed the film to think in any way that I wanted to somehow make Matt's story about me in some gross way. That's not what it was at all. But we had a lot of intense discussions with the creative team, my husband being a producer and our cinematographer, other producers, and they all just ultimately felt and convinced me that it was the right decision for me to be involved on camera so that we could really share this unique point of view, that the person creating this film was also deeply invested in and knew Matt and could lend this, again, unique, very sensitive point of view to the story. However, that decision has never been easy. You know, even if I have to watch the film and watch it back, it's very, very uncomfortable for me. But I think it was ultimately correct because there has been a lot of content made about Matt, really great things. The Laramie Project comes to mind, a lot of TV movies as well. But we just really wanted our film to feel different and be different, to be a really intimate retelling of who the world never really knew. So this was a very poignant way, we thought, to really share that. But yeah, it was hard, like cutting the film, you know, being alone, watching hours and hours of footage of my friend alive again was very, very painful, and hearing these interviews from his family and his close friends just kind of reopening their wounds and being so vulnerable and reliving this horrible time in our past, that was really hard. And I actually had a counselor that worked with me privately for the year that I cut the film, just because emotionally there was a lot of stuff that I hadn't dealt with, and it was coming up a lot while I was redoing the film. And I like to be very honest and transparent with that, because it really was a tough journey for me. I think I have come out the other side, and I'm proud of the film, but you know, it was so not easy. As to your second question, you know, what did I learn about Matt? A lot of things. You know, I think all of us, we have different facets to our personality, to our identities, and you know, you reveal certain things about yourself to certain people and you don't with others. And the Matt that I knew most predominantly was very extroverted, really curious and full of life. I think someone says it in the film as well. He was the life of the party. He was so fun and funny, and he had a really mischievous sense of humor. But I also knew him to be very, very sensitive. But going back into the filmmaking process, thinking about that, meeting all the people who knew him in various ways, I really was confronted with how sad he was. And that was heartbreaking, you know, to revisit kind of certain things that had happened and see just how wounded he was about a lot of things, and that kind of sucked. But because there's nothing you can do. But I really always admired that no matter the sadness or challenges he went through, he was always very proactive about trying to be happy, whatever that meant for him, you know.
Hi.
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 Am I good?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I want to commend you on a beautiful film. It really is something that I think more people need to see. Kind of a two-pronged question as well. One, I went to a public school and not that conservative of a town, and this film is the first I've ever heard of the Matt Shepard story. So I was wondering if there's, through the foundation, are there programs that they're trying to get into schools to teach about things like this at an age where it's not entirely traumatizing but at an age where you can still make an impression, because I know a lot of people who could use to see this film, perhaps not quite as late as college. So that's my first question. And second question is, are there any contacts in Laramie that you still have where they have reported a change, perhaps in the 17 years of, I guess, political air towards this? Or is it still kind of, oh, that's things that happen in our town, but we're different now, but not really?
I'll tackle the Laramie one first, because you hit the nail on the head in both regards. Laramie's, I guess, divided in two. So there's one faction of people in Laramie who are horrified by what happened and don't want this to define their community, and have made inroads to make change so that the rest of the world doesn't look to Laramie as sort of this redneck, bigoted place. However, there's another part of the population that blame Matt for the stigma upon their town and see that this was Matt's fault. And there are a lot of sort of controversial counter-narratives that have been created in the years since that just kind of support that idea, this blaming the victim and not really looking at the difficult question, like what is it about our community that allowed this to happen? So unfortunately, to your question, yes and no. There's still not a hate crime law in effect in Wyoming, so that says a huge thing. At the University of Wyoming, where Matt went to school, their LGBT group is quite robust, and they have a large presence, and they do a Shepard Symposium for social justice every year in his name, in his honor, and I was able to present the film there last April, which was quite an emotional thing, but quite an honor for me as well, just to bring that story back to Laramie. So again, yes and no, unfortunately. Interestingly enough, the sheriff of Laramie, who back then was the lead investigator of Matt's case, he has a very interesting story that we weren't able to go into in the film, but when this had happened, he would say, he would freely admit that at the time he was a bigoted asshole and would say all the horrific derogatory jokes, gay slurs, but going through the investigation, meeting LGBT citizens and the Shepards, it just changed him, and now he's a huge champion for how people investigate hate crimes and with sensitivity, and I think that a lot of people have changed in a lot of ways just in the event of what happened. So that was really quite nice to learn that he has completely done a 180 because of Matt's death. The Matthew Shepard Foundation, they're a wonderful foundation, and Judy and Dennis started it primarily to target young people, and young people who don't necessarily have access to a lot of information. They might be in rural areas and just not be, they don't get access to ideas of diversity or don't see sort of like different types of people around in their community. So they created this foundation for them. And so what they do, they have several educational programs. Something that's really, really more youth-oriented is their online safe space called matthewsplace.com, where young people can just log in and connect with other LGBT young people about whatever they're going through. They do programs on bullying, suicide prevention, sexuality, finances, tons of really cool stuff, transitioning. So I really think that that's something that they really put a lot of weight under, and then Judy and Dennis travel all over the world under their speakers program, sharing their story. They also have a Laramie project specialist on staff who supports basically, if you have a production of the Laramie project, you can contact them, and then she will support you with various information, resources, whatever you need. And that's been, I know, a very, very robust program for them. But yeah, they do all sorts of things. I think right now they're going to spearhead a hate crime statistics initiative to get the reporting of hate crimes mandatory as opposed to voluntary, so that the public can get a really accurate picture of what's really going on. Because right now, for example, in Houston, apparently there are no hate crimes, which, you know, if you think about that, that can't be right. So that's a very, very important thing that they're about to take on. But yeah, they have a great website, MatthewShepard.org, I believe. So I would definitely recommend checking it out.
We have time for about one more question.
I think that's all the questions that we have, but just again, thank you for making such a beautiful documentary, and we all, I think, really learned a lot.
Like I said, thank you for joining us. Before we leave, I just want to ask a question from So our goal is to have our students react to the films that they see. We pick these great films about social action because we want people to actually do something about the issues at hand. So my question to you is, to this audience who just watched your film, what is something that they can do to make a difference? You've definitely mentioned some ways throughout your questions, but what's a way that they can make a difference to help people who may have just suffered from hate crimes, to help prevent it in the future, and to kind of carry on Matt Shepard's cause?
Yeah, there's lots of different things that we can all do. You know, stay educated and vote. That's very important. Donate to various organizations that do amazing work. I can think of a gazillion off the top of my head. But you know what I always like to say, I know it kind of sounds a little trite and, again, naive, but I think you can never underestimate the power of kindness and compassion. And that was a lesson I learned from Matt in his life, not his death. He was such a generous, kind-hearted person. I can't stress that enough. He was just so amazing to everyone around him, strangers even. And I took that to heart, you know, growing up, and I think it truly is important. When you're kind to someone, they experience that, and even if they just witness it, they're more likely to be kind to others, and it's just this really wonderful ripple effect. So when I always like to. My biggest hope for the film is that people watch it and watch Matt's story and reflect on the impact that they can have on someone's life. And one impact you can have is just by being kind and compassionate and accepting and be courageous in your own daily life.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. Thank you, everyone at AU, for coming out. Thank you to the chapter leaders for putting on a great screening. Everyone have a good night.
Good night. Thank you, guys.